To our first workshop of the quarter. Thank you so much for coming. So today we are going to be talking about the psychological impacts of houselessness. If you can go to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so just wanted to mention, so this is a pretty, I feel like most of our workshops have pretty serious topics, but we just want to give y'all like a little content warning that we're going to be mentioning drug abuse and sexual assault in this presentation. So if any of that ever becomes too much, like please like mute your laptop, walk away for a second, like we'll wait until the next slide comes. Like please like take time for yourself if it ever becomes too much. So we just want to give y'all like a little bit of a warning before we get started. Yes. So we're going to be talking about 6 subtopics today. So we're going to be talking about addiction, mental health, physical health, isolation, education, and assault. You can go to the next slide, Isha. Okay. I'm going to hand it over to Giselle.
Giselle, you're muted, honey.
That's why no one could hear me. Okay. Thank you. So I'm going to be talking about addiction, and there's this little video that I just wanted to show, kind of explaining how I wrote that backwards. It's supposed to say how childhood trauma leads to addiction. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's just a video explaining how that happens. And these are just some notes or things to keep in mind. The video is playing that addiction is a mental illness. It is not a choice. Also think about why it's criminalized in like our society. And also the main takeaway from this video, I think, is that more often it is a symptom of houselessness than the main cause of it. And it's usually not the primary problem, but an attempt to solve a deeper rooted issue, which is usually childhood trauma. And also that houselessness creates the conditions that make individuals more susceptible to addiction, which are living in conditions of trauma and stress. So yeah, the video is like about 9 minutes. It's by a psychologist, but we are just gonna watch the first 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, isn't there supposed to be audio? I don't know if anyone can't hear anything.
I can't hear anything either.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it's the volume on. Oh, the person sharing the screen has to unmute themselves.
Oh, really? So Isha, I think you have to unmute yourself while you play the video.
Yeah, sorry, give me 1 second. I'm struggling a little bit, but it's all good. It'll be fixed.
We have technical difficulties sometimes.
Negative consequences.
There you go.
So an addiction is a complex psychological, physiological process, but which manifests in any behavior that a person enjoys, finds relief in, and therefore craves in the short term, but suffers negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up despite the negative consequences. So craving pleasure, relief in the short term, negative consequences in the long term, inability to give it up. Now, notice I have said nothing about substances. I said any behavior. So it could be related to cocaine, crystal meth, heroin, fentanyl, marijuana, nicotine, alcohol, whatever. Could also be sex, gambling, internet, relationships, shopping, eating, work, extreme sports, working out, pornography, any number of human activities. So I said any behavior. Now, the official definition of addiction, according to the American Society for Addiction Medicine, is that this is it's a primary brain disorder. It arises in the brain, largely due to genetic reasons. This is how they see it. And I say that's just not true. The other popular idea about addiction is that it's a choice that somebody makes, that people choose to be addicted, which is what the legal system is based on.
The times comes to be. And yeah, so when you think about it in those terms as addiction as a mental illness, you can kind of better understand how the circumstances of being unsheltered kind of facilitate that. And especially, I think a big part also the lack of support from family and society and the government, because as the man was talking about, Gabor, I don't know how to say his name, he was talking about how the reconnection to self is what people kind of need to aid them in their recovery. And I would imagine that that's extremely difficult when you are surrounded by the trauma and stress of being unsheltered. So yeah, that's basically it. You can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, so I feel like that video kind of shows how it's all connected and how addiction and being houseless can kind of become a cycle, beginning with like, yeah, so all of them kind of play into each other. So mental illness and substance abuse, people with substance and other mental disorders experience even greater barriers to accessible housing than their counterparts, such as income deficits, negative stigmas, and the need for community wraparound services. So yeah, and then also the trauma that is connected to experiencing a substance abuse and being unsheltered. So people who experience childhood trauma are more likely to learn maladaptive coping mechanisms such as substance abuse, and being unsheltered is traumatic in and of itself, where you face the instability of basic needs, the lack of safety, and lack of access to resources. So yeah, the lack of access to resources. As we know, most programs that support the unsheltered community are usually underfunded and usually community-based, such as nonprofits like MSP and religious organizations. And unsheltered individuals, especially those who experience substance abuse, face a lot of stigmas that prevent even the greater of society, like other people besides these organizations, from wanting to help them, because a lot of people do see substance abuse as an individual issue and as so yeah, so all of those things in combination lead to an individual becoming houseless, and all of these factors contribute and increase the risk of that. And so all of these, the cycle continues and these factors continue to feed into each other, essentially. So all of these kind of reasons just continue to play into each other, which I think is why individuals who are unsheltered and also struggle with addiction are some of the most vulnerable in the unsheltered community. Yes, so you may go to the next slide.
I should probably unmute myself to talk. Hello. So in this section, we are going to talk about just like mental health in general. Okay. So as y'all know, I love a good statistic. So we are going to go over some statistics. So it is estimated that about a fourth to a third of unsheltered folks experience some form of severe mental illness, whether that's bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, etc. So essentially 25 to 30% ish of unsheltered folks experience severe mental illness, when as Americans as a whole, like every person in America, only 6% of Americans experience the same issues. So clearly there's like, it's very disproportionate, like just pure like numbers wise. And those who are mentally ill or struggle with addiction are most susceptible to becoming unsheltered. And as you know, all of you probably know already, there are a lot of barriers to accessing proper psychiatric services in the US. And the rates of mental illness among people who experience houselessness in the US are twice the rate found for the general population. And then a study that was done in the state of Massachusetts and Ohio reported that 27 and 36% of discharges from state mental hospitals became unsheltered within 6 months of initial treatment. So once, you know, unsheltered folks may receive initial care, after that initial one visit, then there's no follow-up, there's no assistance, there's no help. It stops there. Like that is where care stops. So the United States healthcare system is not designed to help people. I will say that a second time. The United States healthcare system is not designed to help people. Individual doctors help people. The healthcare system as a whole in the United States is to make money. It's for profit. So if you do not have the money to give the United States healthcare system, you will not receive healthcare. And a study found that 8 to 15% of unsheltered individuals that have severe mental health disorders experience death as a result. So whether it's, I didn't include it in the like subsection, but it's either from, like the most common are aortic aneurysms, heart attacks, and suffocation. And also violent crimes against unsheltered folks with severe mental illness is also another leading cause of death. You know, because if the US healthcare system was actually designed to support people who could not afford healthcare, then these deaths would not occur, which is a very unfortunate reality. If you go to the next slide, Nisha. Okay, so there are multiple barriers to receiving proper mental health care. So one is transportation. So many unsheltered folks, you know, do not have cars, and also a lot cannot afford, you know, like bus fares and stuff like that, or train fares. Also, like I said before, is the cost of care. So if you do not have insurance, like I don't know, I'll use myself as an example. You know, I take one medication, and because I have insurance, that medication is $5 a month for me. But without insurance, my medication is $500 a month. So, you know, without insurance, I could not afford my medication. So, and that is true for a lot of medications. Medications are hundreds, if not thousands of dollars a month. And without insurance, like most Americans cannot afford that. And then also communication is an issue. So most unsheltered individuals, you know, do not have access to phones that are needed to communicate with their providers. So let's say they do land a free appointment and they get, you know, the help that they need. But then after that, how do they stay in contact with their doctors? You know, how do they schedule follow-up appointments? How do they call the pharmacy and see if their prescription is ready? You know, like there's a lot of communication barriers with healthcare. And then also, as I said before, kind of relating to cost of care, medications. So, you know, medications cost a lot of money, and accessibility falls short for most Americans. So, yeah.
All right, so now we're going to briefly talk about how physical health can relate to all of these factors. So if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So a lot of unsheltered individuals throughout their lives will experience a lot of illness due to just their scenario and their situations, because of a lot of close contact and a lot of inability to distance yourself from those around you, and a lot of other reasons as well. Mainly, a lot of unsheltered individuals will struggle with chronic health conditions, which are extremely difficult to treat if you don't have proper access to healthcare, like Tommy was talking about. And a lot of these conditions include high blood pressure, diabetes, asthma, a lot of hypertension. And when you're living relying on other people and very little assistance, you don't have a lot of control over what you consume in terms of food and water. So that can contribute to a lot of other health factors. And as well as communicable diseases, they spread extremely easily, which can accentuate that risk. And another big factor is STIs, which happen very frequently and are extremely hard to treat for the exact same reasons with lack of healthcare. And they're hard to notice, so they're even harder to diagnose. So getting treatment for that is even more difficult. All right. So some statistics for what we just talked about. The unsheltered population has an average, has a 1.8% population that is positive for HIV and AIDS compared to total population, which is vastly different at 0.37%. Same for diabetes. The unsheltered population has a higher risk of getting diabetes due to their lifestyle at 17% compared to the normal 10.5. And keep in mind that there are probably so many other cases that never get noticed because of how hard it is to get diagnosis and to get treatment for this when you're unsheltered. Now, specifically for COVID, it's an entirely different experience for when you're experiencing houselessness. Everything that we've been told to do, like keeping distance, washing hands, wearing masks, is extremely difficult when you don't have the proper resources, which can cause the pandemic to spread in exacerbated ways. So, and we also talked about the chronic health conditions and all of the other illnesses that people may face, which can accentuate those effects even more. And I'm very thankful for Tommy for covering this in great detail because of the healthcare system is so impossible to work with when you are not privileged and when you don't have proper access. It is so tough to get the care that you need. Thank you, Preet. Thank you. All right, last slide. So just to tie everything up, to connect it back to the psych aspect, this is a theory called the hierarchy of needs by Abraham Maslow, which basically states that there are a certain list of needs that you need to be met by category. And health lands on the very first. So if you don't have the ability to keep your health up properly, your physical sense of self will deteriorate and you won't be able to satisfy everything that you need to live a happy and comfortable life. So physical health really is the foundation for making sure that one lives a happy and stable life. And without that, it's very, very hard to keep that stability. So, yeah.
Okay, hi everyone. Now we're going to talk about isolation. So houselessness is an extremely isolating experience in every way. Isolation itself can lead to someone becoming houseless. According to the Bizzell Center, 2 causes for houselessness is the loss of a loved individual and relationship breakdowns. This is understandable because if you don't have a strong support system, it's very easy to go into a period of isolation after these events. Not only can isolation lead to houselessness, but it can also keep individuals there. As we all know, there's a stigma around houselessness. Because of the stigma, these individuals are often treated with little respect. This leads individuals into further isolation, and they choose not to seek help because of this. In a survey done by the Crisis Organization, they found that 44% of houseless individuals often or sometimes feel undeserving of help. Isolation can also lead to physical and mental health issues such as depression. We talked about mental health issues a bit earlier in the workshop. I want to also point out that about 77% of houseless individuals reported that they often or sometimes feel lonely. This was also found in a study done by the Crisis Organization. I think that a simple thing that we can all just do is treat houseless people with respect. Don't pretend they're invisible. Oftentimes, when you do get to talk with them, you see that all they really want is a conversation with someone and to be recognized as a person. Next up, we're going to talk about education. So education is a super important part of everyone's childhood, but it can be extremely difficult for houseless children to get this education. According to KnowledgeWorks, education is the most important long-term strategy to address and prevent child and youth houselessness. Not having a diploma or GED is a big indicator that someone will become houseless. It was reported that about 29% of houseless individuals experiencing poverty have not received their high school diploma. As a child that is houseless, there's often not enough time to worry about schoolwork, especially when you're concerned about when your next meal is going to be or where you're going to sleep at night. You're not able to come to school with a clear mind that's necessary for learning. Some of the effects houselessness can have is you're constantly moving, there's a lack of support, and there's not enough resources available for you, which can all inhibit learning. Houseless children are also at a higher risk of falling behind in school. According to the US Department of Education, only 77% of houseless children can attend school regularly. Lack of education takes some important tools that they may need later in life to escape their situation that they're in. So some things that you can do is volunteer to tutor at shelters. At MSP, we do that. Obviously, we can't do it right now because of COVID, but when we're back in person, I highly recommend all of you to go out there, tutor. It only takes like an hour out of your day, but it can honestly change those children's lives. And yeah.
Okay, so this part of the presentation is definitely going to be very heavy. So, like I mentioned before, the content warning, if this is something that's going to be triggering for you, we're not going to talk about anything in too much detail. It's pretty much all statistics, but I just want to give you all another warning before we get going. So now would be the time if you want to walk away for a second, like mute, whatever you need to do. Please do what you need to do. We can go to the next slide. That'd be lovely. Okay, perfect. So I broke these statistics up into two different groups. So I broke it up into youth and adults. So we're going to start with youth, which is that 61% of girls. So when I say youth, I mean people under the age of 18. 61% of girls and 16% of boys report sexual abuse at home as a reason for running away. So a government organization found that it's estimated that 1.6 million children run away from home each year in the US, which was a very large number that I was not aware of. And 44% of homeless youth are fearful of being sexually assaulted, molested, or raped on the streets. So that study is from 1997, which is a little bit dated, but I was reading more recent studies and the number is still pretty consistent. So according to the National Runaway Switchboard, so to fill y'all in, so the National Runaway Switchboard is an organization. I believe it's a part of the government that is essentially responsible for once runaway children are found, they're the ones that essentially connect them to services, connect them back to the proper, where they need to go, and they assist them, like once they run away. So that organization found that about 40% of the 1.7 million runaway and homeless youth identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. So 40% of unsheltered youth are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And studies show that the age at which you leave home directly relates to sexual victimization on the streets. So the younger you are when you run away from home, the more likely you are to be a victim of sex trafficking or some kind of sexual abuse. And the most common age of entry into the commercial sex industry in the United States is 12 for girls and 13 for boys. And the commercial, what I mean by commercial sex industry is sex trafficking. You can go to the next slide. Okay. So now for adults. So according to a study of unsheltered and marginally housed people, 32% of women, 27% of men, and 38% of transgendered persons reported either experiencing physical or sexual victimization within the previous year. And the lifetime risk for violent victimization for homelessness or unsheltered women, excuse me, with mental illness is 97%. So to kind of connect this section to what we previously mentioned about mental illness, so if a woman is unsheltered and mentally ill, there's a 97% chance that she will be, like a victim of sexual violence. So it becomes like a normative experience for people within that population. And a California study found that women who experienced interpersonal violence in the last year had almost 4 times the odds of reporting housing instability than women who did not experience interpersonal violence. So interpersonal violence is like violence with another person, so like domestic violence, like things along the lines of that. And I also thought it was important to mention to talk about people who partake in survival sex. So like disclaimer before I like talk about this little section, sex work is a valid form of work and consensual sex work is a valid form of work. But survival sex most of the time is not consensual. It's mostly, a way to get like the article that I was reading about it used the term like fast money, where people don't necessarily want to partake in it, but that is just what they need to do in the moment in order to survive. So it is estimated that 37.9% of sex workers that partake in survival sex, most of whom are unsheltered. And it stresses, and all of this information, not just specifically that, but everything that we've talked about so far, I really think it stresses the importance of trauma-informed outreach. Because as Giselle mentioned, as like many other people in this presentation mentioned, that being unsheltered is a form of trauma. Like clearly from everything we've been talking about. So trauma-informed outreach is really, really, really important in what we do. And I believe that at MSP, we do a very good job of being as trauma-informed as we can possibly be. But yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Okay, so that is all that we have for y'all. So we are just gonna give, I know that was like pretty heavy, I apologize to everyone. But any like questions, comments, reactions, like this space like is for all of you. If you have no questions, comments, or reactions, that is also totally fine. But we just want to give y'all like a couple minutes to just like think if y'all want to, any comments, questions, anything like that. Now is your time. You can also send them in the chat if you don't want to, like say them.
I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming because it's week 5. Right? It's week 5.
Yeah, it's week 5.
Yeah. And this can be like pretty heavy to talk about sometimes, and it can be a bit emotionally draining. But I think it's really important for all of us to be informed and, about the experiences of the unsheltered community so we can better help them. And yeah, so thank you everyone for coming, and also thank you to the board members that helped me create this presentation. Shout out y'all. Thank you. Anyways, that's all I wanted to say.
And yeah, as Preet said in the chat, you can also privately message like me or like one of us if you're not comfortable like putting a question or a comment into the like general chat. So I guess I'll just talk for a minute to give you all some time. After, I don't know about y'all, but I feel like especially after really heavy topics and meetings, I feel like giving yourself the space to just breathe, giving yourself a little time to just step back from everything and really just like reflect, or even like, preoccupy yourself, like watch a show you like, do something like that. Like I feel like that is at least how I like partake in self-care after really serious like topics are talked about, because as Giselle said, like it is really emotionally draining. So again, to repeat, I would just like to say thank you everyone for coming. These topics are never easy, but it is really important that we know about them. So if you can go to the next slide, Isha. Yeah, it literally just says thank you. So yeah, so before we sign off, any last questions, comments, concerns about anything at all? It doesn't even have to be about this presentation, anything MSP related, anything non-MSP related.
I would just like to say for the Gen members here, board apps are open now for next year, so please apply if you're interested.
Feel
Yes.
free to.
Yes, so